Welcome to the Gaming Bench. Today I'm going to build an ancient Irish game called Fidchell. It's an interesting position and capture game that shares some mechanics with other ancient games like Hnefaltafl and Merrels. The historical record refers to a variety of games as Fidchell, including square on the grid games that look more like Hnefaltafl or Viking chess. But I'm going to build the version that looks like this, that's played on a round board on a series of concentric circles. There's evidence in the historical record that this is probably closer to what the Celts meant when they said Fidchell. But if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of the rules, history, and strategy of the game, you want to check out the video I'm going to drop next week that goes into depth there. But for now, let's get building. I'm going to make the playing surface out of leather. Couple reasons. First, I've been using wood a lot lately and I want to switch it up and do something else. But more importantly, there's a lot of curves and organic shapes on this board, and I think the leather is going to be a little more forgiving than a hardwood would be. That said, after I cut the board out, I am going to mount it to a piece of wood just to give it some rigidity. All right, first thing to do is I need to draw the board. I found this tool. It's pretty cool. This tool is made for cutting round holes in sheets of drywall. So you like stick it in and then you can spin it around, and this blade, which isn't super sharp, scores the paper on the drywall and you can knock out the shape. I've never used this on leather before, but there's no reason it shouldn't work. Let's give it a try. Cut this down to size to make it a little more manageable, and I have it on a piece of foam board because you have to jam the spike pretty far in to get it to work. So I've already marked out the distance I need these concentric circles to be, and so if this works the way I think it will, I just need to do that. Yeah. All right, pretty good. So I'm just going to make a series of expanding circles until I get to the last one, and then that will give me the outside perimeter of the board. The board will be round, obviously. So if you've never done any leather work before, I have another video that talks about basic leather working terms and where to buy leather and what to look for, and etc. If you scroll back far enough on my videos, you'll find it. I think it's called Introduction to Leather Working. So the little rotary blade on this isn't sharp per se, so it's not really cutting the leather, but it is scoring a line in it, and this works pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this. I will go over everything later with my swivel knife and make deeper cuts. And then at some point, I need to figure out how to decorate this thing. I've taken to filming my introduction last so I can show off the finished project up front. That was a recommendation from one of my viewers. Thanks for that, great idea. So what that means is I hope just a minute or so ago you saw a beautiful finished Fidchell board. But at this point in time, I have no idea what that looks like. I don't have a great plan on how to decorate this thing. I'm not one for making plans in general, but I kind of feel like I have less of a plan than usual for this one. So we're just gonna wing it. All right, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's the 7 concentric lines that form the board. And then I'm gonna cut one more, or score one more. That'll just be the outside perimeter of the game. And this will be my cut line when I get around to cutting this excess leather off. Next, I'm going to score in all the lines that connect the concentric circles. So the first two are easy because they're just straight lines. Just double check my printout, make sure I'm not making a terrible mistake. Nope, not there. And I know I just poked a big hole in the center of this piece of leather, but my plan is to cut a bunch of holes in this, and that's where the marbles I'm going to use as playing pieces will rest. So, not too concerned about any holes in it. All right, now for the rest of the lines, and my attention to detail isn't everything it could be. So I found a board online, sized it up to the right size as my board, and I'm just going to use it as a pattern for where I need to draw my lines. And it doesn't look perfect. I know there's a way to use math to figure this out. Like, this is a 45-degree angle, which makes like this 22.5, I think, but the lines in between, math isn't really my friend, and I find it very confusing. So I'm just going to poke some holes where these lines need to be, and then I will connect them. All right, that looks really good. I'm really happy with that. So I cased the leather, which is just a fancy way of saying is I got it wet, and then let it dry a little bit. You want it cool to the touch. This is really the ideal dampness for inscribing the leather. So I got my swivel knife, and I guess I'm going to start from the inside out. And light is better this way. I'm going to try to make just even, flowing, even lines. Not a great start, but so while it's still a little damp, I'm going to go ahead and punch the holes that will hold the marbles. This is the part that I'm pretty worried about, because just like the concentric circles, if I don't place the punch perfectly, you're going to be able to really tell. And I got to make sure not to punch a hole anywhere that it doesn't belong, but it's just on the intersection, so even I can't screw that up, right? Let's start in the center. Next, I need to decide how I'm going to decorate this. I thought about tooling some designs or maybe stamping something on this, but I'm afraid it's just going to be too visually noisy when you're playing the game. The emphasis needs to be on the points and the connecting lines. I may do something around the border still, but I do intend to put something behind the holes, and now I need to figure out what that is. I could just mount it to a piece of figured wood so that the figure of the wood shows through, which could be kind of cool. I have this piece of red suede, which would be really pretty striking, but maybe too much. I can always just back it with another piece of leather and then figure out how I'm going to dye it. I've done a bunch of test pieces trying to figure out what I think looks good. You know, I really like green, but I don't know if that's right for this. I like the natural. This is just some antiquing. I tried a couple different colors. So I'm not sure. But that is the next thing I need to figure out. Okay, I figured out what I'm going to do. First thing I want to do is add a little bit of decoration to this outer border. Nothing that's going to really cause too much visual noise on the board itself, but I'm just going to stamp a little pattern along the edge. And I have this little kind of starburst looking thing, and I cased this leather again, just got it wet, and now I'm just going to go around the edge and add a design. You know what, I think I'll add a little decoration just to the center too.
That might look all right.
Yeah, all right. I think I like that. Before I do anything else, I want to trim away the excess leather to give me the right circle shape. All right. When cutting through thicker leather like this, it's almost always better to take multiple lighter passes than try to brute force through the leather all at once. Because when you do that, that's when you slip and accidentally cut a big gouge in your leather. Ask me how I know. Now that this is done, I'm gonna treat the edge a little bit because I need to finish that before I start adding any color to it. So I'm going to skive down the edge, which is just essentially I'm going to add a chamfer to both sides because I'll end up rounding this over before I attach it to a backer of wood for a little more stability. All right. That is all the fussing I'm going to do with the edge right now, and now I can start adding some color. I'm going to keep the color on this pretty minimal. So I'm going to paint the edge where I put in this fan shape, the starburst shape in the middle. And I also want to color in all the lines. So I'm going to be using dye to paint. So I need to be careful that I don't get the dye anywhere well, anywhere I don't want it to be. So I'm going to use a fine tip brush and try to be very careful and not drip dye anywhere. And painting with dye is definitely different than water-based acrylic because the dye wants to bleed into the leather, which will be helpful when I'm painting in the lines because it's going to want to flow and follow the lines, but for this part it's a little less helpful. Okay, that looks pretty decent. Green dye is a fiddly color. I've worked with it before and it doesn't seem very color fast. It wants to fade and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 coats to get a really solid color that's not all splotchy. But I'm not going to do that here because I still need to cover this with the antiquing. I am going to finish the edge though. And that will be the last thing I add color to. I decided I'm going to put another piece of leather underneath this board so you can see the color. So I'm going to dye this green too. This is just a really thin, like 2-ounce leather. Also, I found this piece that has this ugly watermark on it for some reason. Not sure how that happened, but this dye will hide a lot of sins. And maybe you can see what I was talking about, how the dye doesn't have great coverage, this green. It wants to be very splotchy. So I'll go over it twice, even though I'm not real worried about it because it's going to be mostly hidden underneath the board and just a little bit of this green will poke through the holes. Yeah, all right, that's good enough for this. So I'll let this dry, I'll let the board dry. It'll dry fast, and then I can add the final color to the top of the board. So here it is with the leather underneath it. And I really like the way this looks. And in theory, I could be done. Just put some sort of sealer over the top of this. But I detest the look of this raw leather. So originally, my plan was to hit it with this antiquing gel. So it gives it this rich brown look like this. But in thinking about it, that gel, if I smear it all over here, it's going to get in all the holes and it's going to be a huge pain to clean up. More importantly, it's probably hard to see, but I dyed the inside of each hole too to match what the leather will look like underneath. And I don't necessarily want to darken that. So instead, I think I'm just going to hit it with another coated dye over top. I have a variety of browns that I'm working with, but they're all really pretty dark. And I'm hoping that the green will show through at least a little bit. So I'm hesitant to just hit it with a dark brown. So I did some experiments with various browns, cutting them with water. So these are water-based dyes, so you can just add water to it. It's gonna make it a little runnier, but it also lightens the color. So here's the dark brown, which is a lot lighter and richer than this bison brown I think is kind of ugly, so I'm not doing that. All right, so I have some 50/50 dark brown water here, and I'm just going to use a big dauber and hope this doesn't ruin the whole project. And that is a really rich color. I love it. Gotta make sure that the dye gets into all the lines, otherwise the greens, oops, shoot, I don't want to do that. Otherwise the greens are going to be different shades. Yeah, it's dark in the green, and I kind of expected that, so it's not so much green anymore, it's just a darker value, but I'm okay with that. I'm really jazzed about how this color came out. It's got this really rich brown. I just love it. Okay, now I need to finish the edges, and I dyed the edges green, so you might be able to see a little bit about that. And I'm just going to use some of this gum tragacanth stuff, which is just this snot-like resin that helps give a nice, clean, burnished finish edge to leather. Last time I did this, I hooked up my slicker wheel to my drill. Since then, I've discovered that it's not really necessary, that just a little bit of elbow grease does just as fine a job as hooking up to the drill and getting, you know, thousands of RPMs. In fact, it might even work a little bit better doing it by hand, because I think when you use the drill, it's going so fast that a lot of this stuff, this gum trag, flies off and doesn't get embedded into the fibers of the leather. So yeah, I won't be doing that anymore. I'm pretty happy with just the results I get with a fingertip and this little wooden slicker wheel. All right, that feels pretty good. Next, I need to glue this onto the back. Okay, let's see if I can get this centered. Looks pretty good. Now I need to dye the back of this. Originally, I was going to mount this to a piece of wood, so I wasn't worried about the back of this, but you know, now that I feel it, it's pretty sturdy and, you know, rigid just by itself. So instead of wasting a block of wood, I think I'm just gonna dye this and then call it a day. So this is more of that 50/50 water dark brown solution. And I need to be careful dyeing this because this leather's really thin. And if I just put a big flood coat on, it'll bleed through to the opposite side and kind of muddy the nice green that I have on the inside of these pegs. So I'm just gonna go easy, not really put a huge amount on. It'll probably be a little splotchy to start. but I'll put on several thin coats to help even it out. All right. I might be about done with this. It doesn't look bad. It doesn't look perfect, but also, again, it's the bottom of the board, so I'm not going to obsess over it. Last step is to put a finishing coat on this. I'm going to cover this with Resin, which is just an acrylic top coat. It'll make it water resistant and give it a little bit of a shine. Make sure I get into all the holes too. And we're done. I'm really happy with how this turned out. It was a pretty simple project, but it turned out really pretty nice. So, this kind of stuff you enjoy, I hope you'll like and subscribe. I put out new videos every week, one on the rules, history, and strategy of an ancient game, and one on how to build your own version. So, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time on The Gaming Bench.